This last weekend's race at Bristol may very well have been an all-time great, and it was pretty much for one reason and one reason alone: tire wear. Which got me thinking, what makes a NASCAR race great? What separates one 500-lap race of left turns from another 500-lap race of left turns? So I came up with a little checklist that turns an average NASCAR race into an all-time classic. But before that, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, NASCAR Pole Position and their 75 Greatest Drivers magazine. Last season, NASCAR added 25 new drivers to their list of the greatest of all time to celebrate their diamond anniversary. And now you can learn all about their legendary stories with this collection of magazines. This collection is absolutely perfect for collectors too, as it features exclusive covers for Dale Earnhardt, Richard Petty, Kevin Harvick, Jimmy Johnson, Bill Elliott, Jeff Gordon, Cale Yarborough, Tony Stewart, Mark Martin, and David Pearson. Plus one cover that includes all of those drivers together. It even ships polybag to make sure your collectible magazine is fully protected. To get yours today, be sure to visit dailydownforce.com/shop. That's dailydownforce.com/shop. Number 1, actual passing. I want to emphasize the actual parts because the way that NASCAR determines passes is kinda ludicrous. Basically, they define a pass as any change in position at any of the track's designated scoring loops. And a change in position is as simple as having a nose ahead of the guy next to you. You don't actually need to fully pass them. So if two drivers race side by side for 5 consecutive laps, it may count for 40 passes, when in reality it's like 1. They also count passes that happen during green flag pit stops, which means that really strung out races with really long green flag runs ironically have very inflated passing numbers. This was actually a pretty big controversy with Phoenix a year or two ago, where NASCAR is flaunting that they had the most passes in Phoenix history. The problem was, none of them were out on the racetrack. Also, it's Phoenix, low bar, why are you bragging? So when we talk about races with actual high amounts of passing, think about this last weekend at Bristol, or just your average Daytona or Talladega race. Comers and goers make for fantastic racing, and generally that comes down to tire management. Something that we don't see a ton of in the modern era, thanks to the absolute rocks that Goodyear's been bringing in the next-gen era, and the advent of stage racing has made tire conservation less of a concern in general, since you know the entire field will have 2 scheduled pit stops. Contrary to what many in the industry believe, variability in speed is a good thing. Does it mean that you run the risk of fields being way more spread out? Yeah, only 5 cars finish in the lead lap at Bristol. But believe me, I'll take that any day compared to a 550 package race with 20 cars within 3 seconds of each other that can't pass because they're all running the same speed. I think sometimes NASCAR is afraid of domination. They have been since Jimmy Johnson, in all honesty, and maybe that's valid. Have you seen Formula 1 recently? Anyway, this entire segment is just a disguise for my Bring Back 900 Horsepower campaign, so thank you for listening to my TED Talk. Number 2, the finish. People tend to remember the end of something more than anything else. It doesn't matter if it's a crappy movie, crappy TV show, or crappy race. If the ending is hype, then people tend to forgive it. The last race at Kentucky Speedway got a 50% approval rating on Jeff Gluck's Good Race poll, probably solely for Cole Custer snatching the win at the end. If not for that, this race probably doesn't crack 15%. Same for Martinsville in 2022. We all didn't expect much out of a next-gen short track race, and for the most part, it wasn't amazing. But Ross Chastain absolutely gluing it to the fence in the last lap made it all worth it. And that wasn't even for the win. But sometimes the opposite is true too. This year's Daytona 500 I thought was shaping up to be an all-time great one. That is until the race ended with a very melodramatic yellow, and that pretty much extinguished any conversation about that. Actually, a race ending under yellow in general is widely considered a bad thing, except for very few circumstances, which we'll come back to in a minute. Pretty much any race that ends with a photo finish is almost universally looked back on favorably, even if you can't remember the rest of it. Admittedly, I'm not old enough to remember the entirety of the 2003 Darlington Spring Race. For all I know, it could have been horrible. I would never know unless I took 3 hours out of my busy schedule to watch it on YouTube. Which actually does sound rather tempting. But the point is, I don't really need to, because the race is already solidified as a classic because everyone knows the ending. Like the Titanic sinking at the end of the film, it's absolute cinema. Except slightly less tragic for non-Kurt Busch fans. Number 3, historical significance. Remember those few exceptions to a race ending under yellow that I mentioned? That would apply to a few ones here. The 1998 Daytona 500 may be one of the most beloved races of all time to finish under the yellow flag, but that's mostly because Dale Earnhardt was finally crowned the winner. If Bobby Labonte beats him back to the caution flag, there's probably a riot breaking out in the grandstands and a rule change the next week. Same goes for the 1984 Firecracker 400. I find it funny that almost everyone just forgets that this race ended under yellow. The photo finish between Petty and Yarborough racing back to the line leads most people to believe that the race had a green flag finish. But despite the yellow, this race is still widely regarded as a classic because, well, it's Petty's 200th win. Although, the fact that they used to race back to the line instead of having the winner decided by someone arbitrarily pressing a button at any random point in time may have something to do with that. Ever since NASCAR did away with racing back to the line in the early 2000s, it seems like there's been a lot more disdain for races ending under yellow. And rightfully so. It sucks! Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Where was I? Oh yeah, historical value. One of my personal favorite races of all time is the 2011 Advocare 500 at Atlanta. Not merely for the awesome 30-lap-long dogfight between Jeff Gordon and Jimmy Johnson, but because of the significance of the win. There's a real chance that we never see someone make it to third on NASCAR's all-time wins list ever again. There's just something magical about watching history in the making. Also, I'm a shill for Jeff Gordon, if you couldn't tell. Historic value can turn a good race into a great race. Sometimes even if it's just something like most cautions or lead changes at a specific track. It doesn't have to be as monumental as Jeff's win in Atlanta or Petty winning 200. Sometimes it's just nice to have a stat to cling to and know that you were a witness to it happening. Okay, unless it's 2008 at the Brickyard, not all records are meant to be celebrated. Number 4, strategy. Whether it's tires, as we mentioned earlier, fuel mileage like we see at Pocono, Michigan, and Indy, or the general pit strategy at road courses, well, less so in the era of stage cautions, rest in peace, but still strategy can be a super enthralling element to a race. Unfortunately, with the exception of Richmond, we don't see nearly as many strategy-driven races anymore. But when we do, they are almost always bangers. Which is kind of ironic using Richmond as an example because most people probably wouldn't consider those races bangers. But, you know, different takes for everybody. And number 5, wrecks. Look, we can just be honest here, right? But hey, that's just my checklist for what makes a NASCAR race great. Do you agree with these points or have any of your own to add? Let me know in the comments down below. But don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and check out dailydownforce.com for more awesome NASCAR content.